Davis 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good!
Crosby in on goal, backhander,
And good! 49ers win it!
Alright everybody, welcome to this episode of the Loki Sports Show. Today, I want to stick to one topic just so I can kind of keep it a little bit more unified and not kind of all over the place. So, basically, this is going to be my kind of take on the XFL Week 1, a more formal take than my TLDR. I'll also be talking about last night's game as well. Actually, I'm going to start off with that first before I really get into the meat and potatoes of Week 1. Last night, the St. Louis Battlehawks played the Seattle Sea Dragons. They won by 2 points. It was off a walk-off field goal. It was a pretty alright game. It was pretty close. It was just really defensive, though. There was a lot of miscommunication, especially with the wide receivers. Also, secondly, there was a lot of in this league, I've noticed they let them play a lot more. So a lot of calls wide receivers probably would get in the NFL. They're not getting in this league, so they're probably expecting that, and that can lead to a lot of the times where it looks like they get bumped off a route or whatever, and they don't get any calls their way. So that's one thing you'd have to consider. Another thing though with the XFL would just have to be I saw this more last night, but I'll have to talk about it when I get to the Week 1 analysis. Would just be one of the unfortunate parts about the XFL, and if it's worth your time or anything like that, would just be the refereeing does suck in this league, unfortunately. I know it sucks in the NFL, and the NFL has had refereeing problems forever now, but I think the refereeing in the NFL is just based on a lot more on how the rules are set up, how they're kind of vague, and then of course a lot of conspiracies on if they want certain teams and markets to get in the Super Bowl or make playoff runs or whatever. I think more so in the XFL, it's just really, unfortunately, it's going to be the fact that these are not NFL quality refs. These are, I'm not sure if the majority of these refs came from college or anything like that, but these are not going to be your cream of the crop for the refs. And that happened last night where I believe it was in the third quarter. Ben DiNucci, who was a quarterback for the Seattle Sea Dragons, he made a scramble and he picked up a third down, which, or at least it looked like on the TV, but according to the refs, he did not pick up the down, so it was like a 4th and short, and then they ended up fumbling on the next play, but it should not have been a 4-down situation. He should have been able to pick it up. I'll probably put like a picture of it on the screen right now, so like you know what I'm talking about. But when stuff like that happens, it does suck because this league is starting up, and you want to have as much attention towards it as possible, but you want to make sure that the attention you're getting is positive, of course, and you're not getting anything like any kind of controversy like what happened last night. The only thing is, unfortunately, I feel the XFL, at least for the weekend games, did have enough attention. It had enough, at least, social media hype, and I was able to talk to people about it, and people were actively paying attention. I don't think people knew that there was a Thursday night game, which is kind of weird just because there's only like 4 games being played anyways. It's not like there's a lot of XFL games kind of going on, so they should have just had it with the Saturday and Sunday slate with the rest of the other teams, so people are more likely to pay attention. But because it was on like Thursday kind of night, I don't think people were just really paying attention to that, unfortunately, because I know also the NBA came back from the All-Star break, so people were a little bit more attentive on seeing how teams from the NBA look with their new squads, new pickups, post All-Star break, etc. Even I didn't know there was a Thursday game until recently, so I understand that if you missed it, this is kind of like the recap. It was a really almost a pretty low score game, all things considered. It was only 38 points scored in total, compared to how other games have been, especially in the NFL. This league is a lot less scoring just because QB play is not as good, obviously, and then there's a lot more miscommunication, especially in the offense. I'll get a little bit more into that in a bit when I talk more about the Week 1 recap, but overall, it wasn't too bad of a game last night. Obviously, there was some kind of refereeing issues that happened, but it is what it is. It's a new league. The refs are going to make mistakes. Even replay with Dean Mandino. One thing I would have to give the XFL a little bit of credit for would just have to be, at least in this league, you can kind of see the logic behind some of these calls, especially with there was a call last week, I'll talk about it right now, where it was kind of like it was a catch by DB, and it was a catch by a wide receiver as well, and the ref saw it, and then it was obvious the DB had it first, but because the ref saw the wide receiver also got it, he called it a touchdown. And then at least in this league, they show you what happens in their kind of replay center, where you see Dan Baldino with the camera angles. He talks about the rules, whether he thinks it should be overturned or if they have enough evidence, etc., etc. The NFL does not do any of that, and it can just feel at times it's arbitrary that whether the rules should be overturned or not is because they can be very vague, and then you don't hear the refs mic'd up talking about, hey, he should have done this or he did that, or you don't really see as much like you don't see like a guy like Gene Steratore actually look at the replay. You just kind of have to take his word for it. In the NFL, XFL, much better job with how they handle that, and it's one thing I have to give them a lot of credit for as well. But let me kind of talk about these week 1 games really fast. The first game, the kickoff, would be the Las Vegas Vipers at the Arlington Renegades. I watched all these games, and this one, obviously since it was the first one, it was a little bit sloppy, obviously, especially from Vegas side after the first quarter. So they had a really hot start with their quarterback Luis Perez, who fun fact about him, I think he's played in almost like every relatively major spring league recently. So he's basically always in a spring league. He's always going to be around this time of year. He's always going to be at the USFL, XFL, AAF, whatever. So one thing you have to give him credit for, Luis Perez credit for, is that he only started playing football at any level when he was in JUCO. So the fact he's on a professional team at all, despite the fact he has not played quarterback as long as other people have, is pretty crazy to me. But of course, it was not enough to win this game, unfortunately, just because he threw 2 really bad pick sixes to Arlington, and that was able to kind of seal that game. But obviously, it was the first game, so we have to see what Vegas does tomorrow. When actually, let me see if they play tomorrow. Yeah, they do play tomorrow against the DC Defenders. They're going to be on their home court, so we have to see how the Vegas crowd is. We're going to be seeing how they're going to be actually going forward with the rest of the season. The next game, unfortunately, I don't have as much to say. Would just be the Guardians at the Roughnecks. This was like the only game that was not close, unfortunately. While in the Vegas game, this kind of slip away for them at the end. The Orlando Guardians, they had that one play I mentioned before that went their way, where it was like a pick, but the refs called it a touchdown. And after that, the Houston just won on a big run. They got like a bunch of points unanswered, and they ended up scoring 33, which is the most any team has scored so far in the league. Obviously, it's like a week and a half though, so nothing too crazy. The next game I'm gonna be talking about would be the St. Louis Battlehawks at the San Antonio Brahmas. This game was a really crazy game just because I'm not gonna lie, after the last 3.5 quarters I kind of tuned out just because San Antonio was up like 12 points after like a field goal. So I'm like, okay, well, I doubt St. Louis comes back. It was like 2 minutes and like some change left, but I was very wrong on that just because I will talk more about the rules in depth after this. But basically what happens is, in this league, there is a 4th and 15 instead of an onside kick. You can have either or and then also there's a 3-point conversion. Let's just say St. Louis had a 3-point conversion touchdown drive, then they had a 4th and 15 conversion, and then they scored it once again, and they're able to win the game in like less than 2 minutes based off that, which is an insanely clutch way, insanely heartbreaking way for San Antonio to lose. But I have to give St. Louis credit. That was a really crazy come from behind win, just because we really got to see the XFL's full rules in play, just because we know, unfortunately, the quarterback play is not as good, but at the very least, we have we have new kickoff rules, we have 3-point conversions, 4th and 15s instead. So there's a lot more ways they can kind of even it out, just so we not see like really bad QB play, kind of like in the USFL, unfortunately, where not as much of these rules were as used, or of course, they are not as known back then just because those are kind of novelties, especially their 3-point conversion, if I remember correctly. And then I know they had a couple other rules, but now that we've had a little bit of time with those rules, and now that the XFL has more time to kind of refine them, I think it works a lot better here. Next game would be the Seattle Sea Dragons at the DC Defenders. This game was really fun. Seattle was up pretty big at one point, but then the DC Defenders were able to intercept Benucci, take it to the house. He got a pick 6. The one thing one have to say about this game would just be the DC Defenders have a wild crowd, very loud crowd, very passionate crowd, and they have like a tradition where they basically stack beer cups on each other and then have something called a beer snake, and then they were doing that, and then their security took it away for some reason. And then unfortunately for the Seattle Sea Dragons, their fans only got more angry and more amped up. Then they were throwing lemons at them. They were absolutely rowdy, very loud. And then when Benvenucci threw that pick 6, that was when they were backed up in their end zone, and then the DC defender crowd was just roaring when they were there. So it was a really fun sight to see. Really fun to see some very passionate fans, despite the fact the XFL only existed for I guess 3 seasons technically, because there was a season all the way back in the early 2000s. Then last couple years back, then COVID hit. So we've had to try a couple times to see this league. I hope sticks around this time though. But let me talk about what I think about some of these rules. So I kind of mentioned before there was a new kickoff kind of rule. So that rule basically just kind of means that instead of basically how in the NFL, obviously we all know that the return teams and the gunner teams both just hit each other as hard as they can, or so they can lay out blocks, and then they can hope at least they can stop the return man, or the return man can take it to the house. In this league, the way it works is that after the kickoff happens, you're not allowed to actually go at each other until the return man actually catches the ball, just so they're not running into each other at full force like the NFL. A lot of injuries are being prevented this way. And at first it was kind of weird just because I'm not really sure what's going on here, just because I just saw them kind of standing around. But once it was explained, I thought it was really good, just so they can keep these players protected, make sure that they're not getting injured, so they can stay healthy, especially if they do want to get another contract or another shot at the NFL. Keeping them healthy is a really good part of it. Also, it's going to allow for a little bit more special teams kind of plays. I want to see how, obviously, it was the first week, a week ago, not even a week ago. So then this new week, especially the Saturday and Sunday games, I want to see how these coordinators, special team coordinators and coaches, I want to see how they can use these new kick rules, just because now that they're not having to worry about their teams running into each other full force and have a little bit more time to kind of prepare. I wonder how to see the blocking, maybe see some fake cutbacks, some kind of I want to see what play calling they do for special teams, especially with these new rules, that now that we know what they're about. One thing that kind of bothered me, it kind of still bothers me, would just be there is the system for the extra points would just be there's the 1 point, 2 point, 3 point. Obviously, 1 point is from the 1 yard line, and I believe 2 points from 5, and I believe the 3 point is from 10 yards or so out. But the only thing I don't like would just be, obviously in the NFL, if you want an extra point, you just kick it. If you're a kicker, you can get the extra point. In this league, there's no extra points from kicks, so you have to always go for it. Even if it's just going to make a run or a pass or whatever. The only thing I don't like about that would just be, so a lot of times I just see teams miss them a lot, and that kind of sucks, just because it doesn't allow just for a safe, easy point, rather than having to contrast that with the risk of a 2-point conversion and a 3-point conversion. Obviously NFL doesn't have a 3-point conversion, but we know that in the XFL we have 2 extra tiers, and because that even on last night I saw St. Louis and Seattle, they were going for 2s and 3s constantly. So that does get up the score a little bit. But because I think they're only doing that just because so far, at least last week when I saw the games, there was the 1-point success rate is not the best. I don't know what it is at the top of my head. But now that we've kind of seen it a little bit more, these offense corners would probably realize they have a better an equal shot going for 2 or 3, and then obviously that's more points. And if it's around the same risk, why would you go for 1? So that's one thing I've been noticing about that kind of rule. So that's one thing I wanted to comment on that. But the next rule I really did like was especially when I saw it kind of in action, would be the 4th and 15 rule, which is different than the NFL doesn't have this rule at all. So basically what happens is, if you are down or if you are tied in the 4th quarter only, so you can't just spam this with a crazy good offense. Basically what happens is that if you're down or tied in the 4th quarter, you have on your 20-yard line, you have a 4th and 15, so you can run whatever play. And then if you convert it, you obviously keep the ball, and then you can have another drive. Or if you mess it up, the other team gets really good field position. So I like that, especially if you're trying to make a comeback, risk-reward factors, or even if you're tied and you're not sure how good your defense is right now, they might be letting up some big plays in the last couple of drives. You might just want to go for it, even if you're only tied, just because you can keep your offense out, try to burn out the clock instead of having to hopefully make one more stop. And then, of course, if you're trying to make a comeback, you need as much possession as possible. So I like this rule, especially how we saw with the San Antonio St. Louis game. Now that we saw in practice, it allowed for a really good come from behind win from Agent McCarron and his guys in the battlehawks, just because normally in the NFL, when you're up that big with 12-point lead, that game should have been done, but because the 3-point conversion, the 4th and 15, it gets allows more excitement just because now teams have to really start playing defense. They can't just coast it when you have like a 10-point lead, just because if you get a touchdown at 3-point conversion at 10-point lead is only 1 now. So you have to be really careful. You have to really make your stops. We have to really keep them out of any touchdowns, just because a 2-point, now that you have more 2-point conversion attempts, 3-point conversion attempts, I feel from the NFL, those leads are going to evaporate much faster. So they have to be really careful on that. So that's one thing I really like about having a 4th and 15 to coincide with that 3-point conversion. These games are not over until it's over. So if a team gets a 1 touchdown, 3-point, that's 9 points. And then if they get the 4th and 15, that's another possession they can be having. So it encourages these teams to really be honest, to really play hard until they actually have the game sealed up. So that's one thing I did like about that rule in particular. And then, of course, I was talking about this earlier, but I like the replay system in the XFL a lot more than how it is in the NFL. So what I kind of mean by that would just be that in the XFL, you can challenge any play that you feel is wrong, just because they were kind of talking about this in the first broadcast, just kind of making fun of how the NFL does it, because in the NFL, I forget which rules and which rules are not, but basically there's a bunch of rules you cannot challenge at all. So basically, if there's like a bad roughing the passer or pass interference, it's too bad. You can't overturn them. You can't manually throw a flag and challenge them. XFL, however, any play is under a fair game. So like something like that happens, there's like a really weird roughing the passer call, they can challenge it, and then if they overturn it, they get all those yards back. And so I like how this was worked, just because we saw before in the Super Bowl, like even the announcers were commentating on this one about the Super Bowl, just because there was the holding which on James Bradbury when he was lined up against Juju Smith-Schuster, and the fact that Nick Sirianni was not even able to challenge it obviously just sucks completely. And so in this league, being able to challenge any play if that are not normally challengeable in the NFL is going to be really interesting to see. Really interesting to see how coaches take advantage of that, especially in closer to the playoff time, where every play matters, and there might only be one game away or so from making the playoffs. I'm pretty sure they might use these challenges a little bit more aggressively, so they can see if they can overturn opponents' gains, catches, whatever they have to do to win those games. So I'm really interested to see how that review rule is going to work, especially with when the coaches get more used to it, get more used to this climate as well. So another thing I did like about the XFL, have liked about the XFL so far would just be, I feel the physicality in this league is very good. It's nothing too insane, but there's a good, they generally hit each other hard. The DBs hit hard, the linebackers hit the running backs hard. Overall, it's a lot more grinding than the NFL has been in recent years, because we've known there's a lot more rules in the NFL to protect quarterbacks, wide receivers, etc. And this league, those rules are a little bit more lax for the defense. So we've seen some pretty big hits. We've seen some pretty kind of late hits as well on some quarterbacks. I know there was couple in the St. Louis game, there was a couple times where McCarron got hit after the fact or so, but they didn't really call it or anything like that. And so another thing we'd have to take into account because of that would just be, I think the offenses, especially if they've been used to like the NFL rules, are probably gonna have to adjust to the fact that the wide receivers are not going to be as free, just because there's a lot more bumps. There's going to be a lot more physicality coming off routes. On last night's game, there was a lot of times where wide receivers wanted flags, but the refs were not really calling them, because in this league, the criteria to get kind of PI'd is a lot higher than in the NFL. So we have to not too sure how to feel about that, because there's some times I feel the receivers are getting absolutely held in the XFL, but they haven't really called that yet. So maybe they'll make some adjustments on what's PI, what's not in this league. But one thing I do have to like would just be the fact that obviously these guys are trying to make the league again. So they're passionate, they're very hungry, and that shows, because these hits are hard. They're running with everything they have, and that makes the game a little bit more easy to kind of invest in, just because in NFL it kind of takes you out of the experience when if there's like one big hit, it's like a unnecessary roughness, there's a big it's like a holding call, or like a roughing the passer, like a random kind of ticky-tack PI call. In this league, not so much. So that's one thing I can really appreciate about it, even if some of the other aspects of the league with like kind of like the obviously there's obviously a lot less talent than what there is in the NFL. If wide receivers especially and quarterbacks, but still, that's one thing I can really appreciate is that they're trying to make this game a little bit more physical than how it is in the NFL, and they're trying to make a little bit more of a product geared towards the fans. As I mentioned before, the fact that they actually have the mic'd up refs is really kind of showing that they're more geared towards the fans than the actual NFL is. Another thing, this was not my original point, but Flemlo Raps pointed this out. He's a really good YouTuber. If you have not seen his content, I highly recommend you do so. But he made a really good point that in the XFL, there is the investor. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. But then we have The Rock and Danny Garcia, obviously, who are the owners of the XFL. And one thing in the XFL is that Garcia and The Rock are a lot more attentive towards their product. Like how in the opening weekend, they made it to like every one of the games. And I know the majority of their games were in Texas, and there was one in Washington, D.C. But I think it means a lot that the owners themselves are coming to all the games. They're talking to the players. They're interacting with the fans. Just because in contrast to the NFL, most of the owners, if they even go to the games, they're in those big suites, the big press boxes. There is looking down. They're all their rich buddies. They don't really care about the fans. It's obvious that what the NFL is for them is just to make money. I feel at least with the XFL, it's a lot more of an experience for the fans, especially with how we've seen it with The Rock and Danny Johnson having every speech on opening weekend, make it to every game too. That was 4 different games. They all made it. They made it to every one of them. So you got to give them some more credit for making it more fan based kind of experience rather than just trying to make a bunch of money from it. And having the mic'd up stuff, I really like just because obviously the NFL has mic'd up QBs and whatever other star players. But having mic'd up coaches in this league is really interesting, especially we get to see their play calls, and the announcers talk way more about the play calls rather than what actually happened after a play, which is, I think, a better take than the NFL, just because the NFL is a lot more reactionary, while the announcers, if they hear like a certain information or like a play call, they'll talk to each other about it, whether it can be like a run to the left, a QB draw, whatever. It kind of makes me more interested because they're trying to break down the play to see if they're right or whatever. That's pretty fun. That's one thing I did like about opening week for the XFL as well. One thing though about the mic'd up stuff would just be, as I mentioned before, refs are mic'd up, so we get to really see their perspective on things, is because it's really easy to antagonize the refs in the NFL or in any professional sport, especially when we don't really know what their personality is like. We don't have mic'd up like it is in XFL. So when they make a bad call, when they don't make a call at all, like, and we don't see the reactions, they don't have media coverage. So basically, what happens is if a ref makes like a game turning decision or no decision, and then another team wins or loses because of that, and they just kind of get off of it scot-free, it kind of sours a lot of fans' experiences because, well, this goes for every league, but especially a couple of weeks ago, there was the controversy where LeBron James got like hacked on the final play of the game, no call, and then, of course, there was like a big kind of firestorm on that on social media especially, and then, but having, at least in XFL, if that would have happened, we'd have at least heard the ref's reaction. We would have at least understood where they were coming from. While in these other leagues, they hide the refs as much as they can. The media can't really talk to them. And so having in this league where they're mic'd up in the game, so we really hear that when we actually get to see the replay angles, any reviews Dean Blandino does as well. Really nice touches. One thing I can really appreciate about the XFL. One other thing I did like about it would just be, I like how interactive the sideline reporters are with the players, coaches, and other personnel. I know there was a bad play against I believe it was the Vegas Arlington game where they asked one of the sideline reporters, "Hey, can you ask the coach what happened on that pick six?" And then the guy actually went up to him and asked, "Hey, what happened there?" And then the coach was obviously pretty pissed. He gave a blunt answer. And then it was just really fun to see how sideline reporters went up to players right after big plays. So like players were catching their breath. "Hey, what did you think about that pick?" And then the player would just tell them what they think about it, like right after the fact that happened, rather than talking about it maybe at the end of the game. So having like direct interactions with players after big plays, bad plays, whatever, it gets we get in a way we get to know them a little bit better, is because now we see their immediate reaction to doing something in game, and then we get to see how they interact with the reporters as well, to see how they feel about what they just did or didn't do. and because we get to see that a lot more in this league, it just makes it a lot more fun. It makes it a lot more unique than it does like in the NFL as well. But right now, guys, so before I go, I still want to kind of give my final thoughts. If you haven't watched the XFL yet, or you're kind of cautious, not really sure, I would highly recommend you do so. At the very least, it's very entertaining. It's not going to be as good as the NFL, obviously, so don't come in expecting like an NFL 2. It's going to be a little bit lighter than NFL, but still a very fun experience. Very fun to watch. Big hits. You'll still see some big plays here and there, so it's not going to be as dynamic as the NFL, obviously, but I'd highly recommend you should at least give one game a shot, even if you like other sports like basketball, hockey, or whatever. At least check out that XFL before you make a decision on it. And I understand that if you're a diehard NFL fan and you don't care about other sports, I highly recommend at least give this league a shot, just because it's really unique, very interesting, and then it's still football, so at least you'll be able to enjoy that. All that being said, I hope you guys all have a great day. I'll talk to you guys later.